On a crisp Tuesday morning in early autumn, a black man stepped out of a coffee shop in the quiet, moneyed suburb of Crestwood Falls, Connecticut, holding nothing but a vanilla latte. 30 seconds later, he was shoved hard against a brick wall, steel handcuffs biting into his wrists, while a smug young patrol officer crowed about bagging a suspicious character. The officer had no idea the man he had just illegally detained was not some local trespasser or opportunistic thief. He was a senior FBI supervisor with an unblemished 22-year record, and that ordinary morning coffee run was about to cost the town more than $5.5 million. Crestwood Falls was the kind of place where the lawns looked like green velvet. The property taxes could buy a modest house in most of America, and crime was something people only read about in the papers from other zip codes. Quiet streets, luxury SUVs, designer coffee shops. For Adrian Holt, a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the town was supposed to be a sanctuary. After more than 2 decades hunting domestic terrorists, dismantling organized crime networks, and working 70-hour weeks, Adrian and his wife Lillian had finally bought their dream home here only 3 months earlier. At 48, Adrian carried quiet authority the way some men carry a watch. 6'2", posture still sharp from the years he spent in uniform before Quantico, he moved through the world like a man who no longer needed to prove anything. That morning he wore a tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and a deep burgundy tie. He looked like a Fortune 500 executive or a high-powered attorney. To the wrong pair of eyes, though, he was simply a black man walking through a neighborhood where certain people still believed he did not belong. The air carried the first real bite of fall. Adrian parked his jet-black Audi A8 outside the Copper Bean, an artisanal coffee shop right in the middle of Crestwood Falls' carefully curated downtown. He left his leather briefcase on the passenger's seat. Inside were classified briefing materials for a joint task force meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock at the regional field office. Tucked into the inner breast pocket of his jacket was the slim leather folio that held his gold FBI badge and federal credentials. He walked in. The little bell above the door gave its familiar soft chime. The barista, a college kid named Noah, already had the order punched in. "Morning, Mr. Holt. Large vanilla latte, extra shot." "You've got a good memory, Noah." Adrian handed over a 20 and dropped the change into the tip jar. He stood near the pickup counter, scrolling through a secure email on his government phone. The interstate trafficking case he was overseeing was finally moving toward indictment. Today felt like it was going to be a good day. 5 minutes later, he stepped back into the sunlight, warm paper cup in his left hand, phone in his right pocket. He drew a slow breath of the clean air and started the short walk to his car. He never noticed the black and white Crestwood Falls Police Department cruiser idling near the corner. The officer inside had certainly noticed him. Officer Derek Sloan was 26, 5 years on the job, and the kind of cop his sergeants politely called overzealous. In truth, he was a bully who used the badge, the gun, and the polished tactical gear to paper over a deep well of insecurity and almost no real street experience. Crestwood Falls was quiet, so Sloan spent most shifts writing speeding tickets, answering noise complaints, and aggressively policing the town's borders to keep outsiders from lingering. As he sat in the cruiser sipping lukewarm gas station coffee, his eyes locked on Adrian. Sloan did not see a federal agent. He did not see a homeowner. He saw a tall black man in an expensive suit walking toward an $80,000 luxury sedan. In Sloan's mind, the math simply did not add up. Probably a stolen car, he thought, heart rate climbing with the thrill of a potential arrest, or some high-end fraud type passing bad checks, without ever running the Audi's plates that would have instantly returned a clean registration to an address 2 miles away in the town's most exclusive subdivision. Sloan dropped the cruiser into drive. He rolled forward along the curb, matching Adrian's pace. Adrian reached the car and pressed the unlock button on the key fob. The Audi chirped. The side mirrors unfolded. Just as his hand touched the door handle, the sudden aggressive whoop of a police siren shattered the morning quiet. Adrian stopped. He turned his head slowly, expression neutral. The cruiser had angled in hard, deliberately blocking the Audi from leaving. Red and blue lights flashed across the storefront windows, drawing the attention of every pedestrian on the sidewalk. The cruiser door swung open. Officer Derek Sloan stepped out, hand resting casually but deliberately on the butt of his sidearm. He puffed his chest and adjusted his duty belt in a manufactured show of dominance. "Hey, you there, step away from the vehicle." Adrian Holt, who had stared down cartel enforcers and domestic extremists, simply stood his ground. He took a calm sip of the latte, lowered the cup, and looked the young officer straight in the eye. He knew exactly how this particular script usually played out. He just did not yet know how completely he was about to rewrite the ending. "I said step away from the vehicle." Sloan closed the distance and stopped about 6 feet away, feet planted wide, right hand still draped over the holster. Adrian slowly lowered the cup. His mind, trained by decades of tactical work and constitutional law, began cataloging every detail. Time, 8:22 a.m. Location, Main Street, Crestwood Falls. Name tag, D. Sloan. Posture, aggressive. Justification for the stop, 0. "Good morning, officer," Adrian said. His voice was a deep, even baritone, completely free of panic or anger. The calm only seemed to irritate Sloan further. "Is there a problem?" "The problem is you're trying to get into a vehicle that doesn't belong to you." Sloan's eyes raked over the expensive fabric of the suit. "Whose car is this?" Adrian blinked once, slowly. He did not reach for his credentials. In his work, he had supervised internal corruption cases. He knew that the moment a gold badge appeared, bad cops suddenly remembered their manners. They apologized, tipped their hats, and went right back to harassing people who had no shield to protect them. Adrian made a deliberate choice. He was going to let this play out. He wanted to see exactly how Officer Sloan treated an ordinary civilian. "The car belongs to me, officer." Sloan gave a short, ugly scoff. "Right, and I'm the mayor of Crestwood Falls. Let's see some ID, now." "Officer Sloan, isn't it?" Adrian read the silver nameplate. "Before I reach into my pockets, could you articulate your reasonable suspicion for this stop? What crime do you believe I've committed?" The words articulate and reasonable suspicion hung in the air. Sloan's eyes narrowed. He recognized the language. It was the language of people who made his job difficult. His face flushed. "Don't play lawyer with me." He took a half step forward. "We've had reports of luxury car thefts in the tri-state area. You fit the description. That gives me all the probable cause I need. Hand over your ID or things are going to get uncomfortable real fast." Adrian knew the law cold. A vague report of car thefts somewhere in the tri-state area did not create reasonable articulable suspicion to detain a specific person, much less demand identification under threat of arrest. It was a fishing expedition. It was textbook racial profiling. "With respect, officer, walking to my own car with a cup of coffee doesn't fit the description of any crime. If you run the plates, you'll see the vehicle is registered to me at an address right here in Crestwood Falls." "I'm not running the plates until I see your ID." Sloan's voice rose. His hand tightened on the gun. Pedestrians had stopped walking. A woman with a yoga mat watched from the corner. An older man with a golden retriever paused near the bakery. The public spectacle was growing, and Sloan was entirely focused on asserting control. "My driver's license is in my wallet in my back right pocket," Adrian said, still perfectly still. "But I want it on the record that I do not consent to this detention. You are detaining me without reasonable suspicion. That is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights." "Shut up!" Sloan grabbed the radio mic on his shoulder. "Dispatch Unit 4. I need a backup unit at Main and Elm. Subject is non-compliant and argumentative. Possible 1085. A 1085 was a stolen vehicle. Sloan was escalating on nothing but ego and prejudice. "I am not being argumentative," Adrian said, voice still calm and carrying the quiet authority of a man who commanded hundreds of armed agents. "I am stating my constitutional rights. If you want the ID, you can retrieve it. I am handing it over under duress. Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car. Do it now." Adrian took a slow breath. He could feel the eyes of his new neighbors on him. He could feel the humiliation Sloan was trying to manufacture. He was a master of the long game. He turned, placed both hands flat on the cool, polished roof of the Audi, and set the coffee cup neatly on the hood. Sloan came up from behind. Without warning, he kicked Adrian's feet apart harder than necessary, forcing him into a wide, vulnerable stance. Then he drove a forearm into the middle of Adrian's back, pinning him against the car. "You think you're smart, huh?" Sloan leaned in close enough that Adrian could smell the stale coffees on his breath. "You come into my town wearing a fancy suit, throwing big words around. We know how to deal with your kind around here." "Your kind." Adrian filed the phrase away with clinical precision. Sloan yanked the wallet from Adrian's back pocket, flipped it open, and pulled out the Connecticut license. "Adrian Holt." The name came out dripping with sarcasm. "Well, Adrian, let's see what kind of warrants you've got hiding in the system." A second siren wailed. Another Crestwood Falls cruiser tore down Main Street and angled in hard behind Sloan's car. The doors flew open and Officer Travis Quinn climbed out, older, thicker through the middle, face weathered by years of comfortable complacency. He immediately drew his taser and pointed it at Adrian's back. "What do we got, Derek?" "Suspect's uncooperative. Refused to provide ID at first. Suspected auto theft." Sloan lied smoothly, holding up the license like a trophy. "Keep him pinned. I'm running the name." Adrian remained perfectly still against the car. "Officer Quinn," he said, reading the second name tag from the corner of his vision. "Your partner is feeding you false information. I offered my identification. He is conducting an illegal Terry stop without reasonable suspicion." "Shut your mouth." Quinn stepped in, grabbed Adrian's left arm, and twisted it hard behind his back. "You don't talk unless we ask you a question." "I'm securing him," Sloan announced, pulling steel handcuffs from his belt. He had completely abandoned any pretense of waiting for dispatch. He had an audience now. Coffee shop patrons were staring through the glass. Noah stood in the doorway looking stricken. Sloan was putting on a show. "Place your right hand behind your back." Adrian did not resist. The cold steel bit into his wrists. Click, click, click. The cuffs ratcheted down punishingly tight, cutting off circulation. "Is the detention official?" Adrian asked, voice still chillingly calm. "You're under arrest for obstruction and resisting an officer," Sloan hissed into his ear. Then began a rough pat-down of the outside of the suit jacket. Here was the pivotal moment. Adrian's gold badge and federal credentials sat in a thin leather folio nested perfectly in the inner left breast pocket. Because the suit was high quality and tailored, the slim profile did not create an obvious bulge. Sloan patted the exterior fabric and completely missed it. He never searched the interior pockets. He never found the one object that would have frozen him in pure terror. Strike three, Adrian thought. Unlawful detention, false arrest, inadequate search incident to arrest. They were digging their own graves with an excavator, and he was perfectly willing to let them keep digging. "Walk," Quinn ordered, shoving him toward the first cruiser. They paraded him down the sidewalk. Adrian held his head high. He caught Noah's eye and gave the young barista the smallest of nods, a silent message that he was all right. The humiliation was theater. In reality, Adrian was a predator willingly walking into a cage, knowing he held the only key. Sloan opened the rear door and shoved him inside. The plastic bench was hard. The space was cramped. The door slammed shut, sealing him behind the wire mesh. Outside, Sloan and Quinn leaned against the trunk, laughing. "Did you see the look on his face?" Quinn chuckled. "Thought the tailored suit made him untouchable." "They all think they're untouchable until the bracelets go on," Sloan answered, profoundly pleased with himself. He keyed the radio. "Dispatch, Unit 4, 1 in custody, transporting to the station for booking. Need a tow at Main and Elm for the suspect vehicle." Inside the car, Adrian shifted his weight, easing the pressure on his wrists. He closed his eyes and began drafting the incident report in his mind. Not a police report, a Federal Civil Rights Division report. He calculated municipal liability. He considered the gross incompetence of a department that allowed officers to operate with such open contempt for the Constitution. The engine roared. Sloan climbed into the driver's seat and glanced back through the plexiglass. "Hope you're comfortable back there, VIP. You're going to be spending a lot of time in a cell." "Officer Sloan," Adrian said, voice easily carrying through the partition. "I recommend you call your watch commander. Tell him you have Adrian Holt in custody. See what he says." Sloan rolled his eyes and dropped the car into drive. "I don't need the captain's permission to book a car thief. I know exactly who you are." "No, officer," Adrian whispered to himself as the cruiser pulled away from the curb, leaving the Audi behind. "You really don't." The drive to the Crestwood Falls Police Department took 6 minutes. Adrian remained completely silent the entire way. He did not argue. He did not plead. He simply let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. All that remained was to spring it. The station was a brutalist concrete box tucked behind the municipal courthouse, a stark contrast to the sunlit streets it supposedly protected. Inside, the air smelled of industrial floor wax, stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of nervous sweat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Sloan marched Adrian through the reinforced steel back doors, grip unnecessarily tight on his bicep. Quinn followed, whistling a tuneless melody, utterly unaware of the catastrophe they had just invited into their precinct. Adrian walked with measured, deliberate strides. Even with his arms pinned and the steel grinding into his wrists, he carried himself with quiet dignity. They entered the primary booking room. 3 empty holding cells sat to the left, bars painted a dull institutional gray. In the center stood a high wooden desk. Behind it sat Desk Sergeant Harold Finch, a 20-year veteran counting the days to his pension. Receding hairline, thick mustache, permanent expression of weary irritation. He was pecking at a report with 2 fingers on a clunky keyboard. Finch looked up as the heavy doors slammed. His eyes moved from Sloan to Quinn and finally settled on the man in the charcoal suit. Something did not fit. This was no vagrant, no local drunk, no frantic petty thief. The suit alone probably cost more than Finch's monthly take-home. And the man was not vibrating with the usual panic of a fresh arrest. He was unnervingly still. "What do we have this morning, Sloan?" "Caught us a live one, Sarge." Sloan shoved Adrian forward into the painted yellow box on the floor. "Suspect was hovering around a high-end Audi on Main. Matched the regional profile for those luxury auto theft rings. When I approached and asked for ID, he got immediately uncooperative, refused a lawful order, got argumentative, resisted detention, brought him in for obstruction and resisting. We're impounding the vehicle." Adrian stood silent in the yellow box and looked straight at Sergeant Finch. He said nothing. He simply let Sloan's fabricated story hang in the air, cementing itself on every audio and video recording system in the room. Finch frowned and rubbed his chin. "Name?" "Says it's Adrian Holt." Sloan tossed the leather wallet onto the desk. It landed with a dull thud. "Connecticut license confirms it. Address lists him up on Crestview Drive. Pretty sure that's a fake. No way this guy owns a house in that subdivision." Finch sighed, opened the wallet, and typed the name into his terminal. "All right, Mr. Holt, we're going to process inventory. Sloan, empty his pockets, belt and tie off. You know the drill." "Happily." Sloan stepped behind Adrian. "Spread your legs." Adrian complied. Sloan performed the thorough search he had neglected to do on the street. He pulled out Audi keys, a silver money clip holding a thick fold of cash, and a slim smartphone, tossing each item onto the desk. Then he moved to the suit jacket, right side empty, left side. His hands found the solid rectangular bulge inside the inner breast pocket. What do we have here? A victorious smirk. Carrying concealed, trying to hide something? Sloan jammed his hand inside the jacket and yanked out the slim black leather folio. He did not bother to open it. He simply tossed it onto the desk on top of the wallet. Secondary wallet, probably where he keeps the stolen credit cards. Sergeant Finch was not laughing. He picked up the folio. The leather was soft, expensive calfskin, slightly heavier than a normal wallet. He flipped it open. The air in the booking room seemed to vanish. For one suspended second, Finch simply stared. His breathing stopped. The blood drained from his face until his complexion was the color of dirty snow. His heart performed a violent, panicked stutter. Gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights was a solid gold shield bearing the unmistakable crest of the United States Department of Justice. Beneath it, a laminated high-security federal identification card. The photograph was a crisp, professional image of the man standing in handcuffs. The text was large, bold, and devastating. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Adrian Holt. Supervisory Special Agent Clearance. Top Secret, Year SCI. Finch's hands began to tremble. A cold, nauseating dread washed through him. He was not holding the credentials of an ordinary agent. He was holding the credentials of a supervisory special agent, a high-ranking executive who directed task forces and possessed the authority to dismantle local police departments brick by brick if they crossed into federal civil rights territory. "Sloan," Finch whispered, voice cracked and emptied of all previous authority. "Yeah, Sarge. Find a stack of fake platinums?" Sloan was still pulling Adrian's tie loose. "Sloan, stop! Step away from him, right now!" It was not a request. It was an urgent, desperate command. Sloan paused, confused by the sudden shift. "What? Why? I haven't finished the pat-down." "I said step the hell away from him," Finch roared, slamming both palms on the desk. He stood so fast his chair rolled backward and crashed into the wall. Sloan jumped and took 2 defensive steps back. Quinn, who had been leaning against the wall, suddenly stood straight, hand instinctively moving to his duty belt. Finch walked quickly around the desk, carrying the folio as if it were an unexploded bomb. He approached Adrian. He could not look at Sloan. "Sir, Agent Holt, I apologize. I need to take these cuffs off you immediately." He lunged for the keys on his belt. His fingers fumbled in pure panic. Finally, the left cuff sprang open, then the right. Adrian brought his arms forward slowly. He rolled his shoulders and winced as circulation flooded back into his hands. He rubbed the raw red grooves the over-tightened steel had left in his wrists. Then he looked at Sergeant Finch, and finally, deliberately, at Officer Derek Sloan. The arrogant smirk had vanished from Sloan's face. It was replaced by profound, paralyzing confusion that was rapidly transforming into pure terror as his eyes dropped to the open folio on the desk. He saw the gold shield. He saw the bold blue letters. FBI. Sloan's stomach dropped into a bottomless hole. The room started to tilt. The Alpha Cop facade shattered, leaving only a terrified 26-year-old who had just handcuffed, assaulted, and falsely arrested a senior federal executive. "Officer Sloan," Adrian said. The same calm, measured baritone he had used on the street now carried the weight of a descending blade. "I believe you were saying something about how you deal with my kind around here." The silence that followed was suffocating. Quinn backed away until his shoulders pressed against the cinder block wall, trying to put distance between himself and the radioactive blast radius of his partner's mistake. Sloan stood frozen, mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in open air. "Get Captain Yates down here," Adrian said. The tone was not raised, yet it carried absolute command. "Right now." Finch scrambled to the red internal phone and dialed the watch commander's extension. His hands shook so hard he dropped the receiver once before getting it to his ear. "Captain, it's Finch in booking. You need to come down here immediately. Sir, it's an absolute emergency. We have a situation." Adrian calmly walked to the desk. He picked up his suit jacket, ignored the wrinkles Sloan had caused, and slipped it back on. He adjusted the collar. He picked up the gold shield, polished a small smudge with his thumb, and slid it back into the inner breast pocket. Then he picked up his phone and dialed. "Yes, this is Supervisor Holt. Connect me to the special agent in charge, please. Yes, it's urgent. I'll hold." Sloan's knees went weak. He was watching his career, his pension, and quite possibly his freedom evaporate in real time. The heavy steel doors burst open. Captain Raymond Yates, tall, silver-haired, deeply lined face, stormed into the room. One look told him everything. Finch pale and sweating, Sloan looking like he was about to vomit, Quinn trying to disappear into the wall, and a sharp-suited black man calmly holding a phone. What the hell is going on here? Adrian lowered the phone and covered the microphone. "Captain Yates, I presume?" "I am. Who are you, and why does my booking room look like a hostage situation?" Adrian produced his credentials and held them so the captain could read every word. "Supervisory Special Agent Adrian Holt, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division." Yates stopped dead. The color drained from his face exactly as it had from Finch's. The Civil Rights Division. The absolute worst-case scenario. The division that investigated police corruption, brutality, and systemic constitutional violations. "Agent Holt, I don't understand. Why were you brought in here?" "That is an excellent question, Captain." Adrian slipped the credentials away. "I was walking to my legally registered vehicle carrying a cup of coffee when your officer, Mr. Sloan, initiated a Terry stop without reasonable articulable suspicion. When I politely asked for his justification and informed him I did not consent to any search, He physically assaulted me, pinned me against my vehicle, illegally searched my person, and placed me under false arrest for obstruction. He also made a thinly veiled, racially charged comment about my kind being in your jurisdiction. Yates slowly turned his head toward Sloan. If looks could kill, Sloan would have been ash on the linoleum. "Sloan, tell me this is a joke. Tell me he's lying." Sloan swallowed. His throat was sandpaper. "Captain, he fit the description of... There have been auto thefts." "A luxury auto theft ring?" Adrian interrupted, voice surgical. "A ring my division is currently tracking that consists entirely of Eastern European nationals operating out of shipping ports. Is that the description I matched, Officer Sloan?" Sloan had no answer. He was drowning. "Captain Yates," Adrian continued, stepping closer. "Under Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, it is a federal crime for anyone acting under color of law to willfully deprive any person of rights protected by the Constitution. Officer Sloan violated my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure and my 14th Amendment rights to equal protection. He did it on camera, in front of witnesses, and documented it on your dispatch radio. He let the statutes hang in the air like a storm cloud. Furthermore, Officer Quinn failed in his duty to intervene, making him an accessory to the civil rights violation. Your department has a systemic problem, Captain. I am going to make it my personal mission to expose it." Yates was sweating through his uniform. "Agent Holt, please. We can handle this internally. Sloan will be suspended immediately pending investigation. We'll fast-track a disciplinary hearing. This is a massive misunderstanding." "It was not a misunderstanding," Adrian said coldly. "It was deliberate racial profiling. I am leaving now. I want my belongings. I want my vehicle unblocked and untouched." "Of course, sir." Yates rushed to gather the keys, wallet, and money clip and handed them over like tribute. Adrian looked at Sloan one last time. "You thought the badge gave you a blank check to terrorize people you decided didn't belong in your town. You're about to learn exactly what real accountability looks like." He pushed through the steel doors and stepped back into the bright morning sunlight. He raised the phone to his ear again. "Yes, I'm still here. I need to open a formal civil rights investigation into the Crestwood Falls Police Department immediately, and I'll be contacting private counsel. It's time to draft the civil suit." Adrian Holt walked back to his Audi, leaving the terrified precinct behind him. The real battle had not even begun, but the victory was already written. The next morning at 8:12 a.m., a convoy of black Chevrolet Suburbans rolled into the Crestwood Falls Police Department parking lot. They did not use the visitor spaces. They occupied the spots reserved for command staff. A dozen federal agents in windbreakers marked with bold yellow FBI letters poured into the building carrying federal subpoenas, search warrants, and the full weight of the United States Department of Justice. Adrian had not made idle threats. He had contacted Jonathan Pike, one of the most relentless civil rights attorneys on the East Coast, a man who had built a career bankrupting corrupt municipalities. Together, they filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit alleging egregious violations of the Fourth and 14th Amendments, false imprisonment, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The civil suit was only the opening move. The criminal investigation launched by the Department of Justice was the true existential threat. Captain Yates stood helpless in the lobby while federal agents boxed hard drives, seized dispatch recordings, and demanded personnel files for every officer on the roster. "You're overstepping," Yates protested weakly to the lead investigator, Special Agent Vance Morrow. "A localized procedural error." Morrow's eyes narrowed. "Your men assaulted a federal executive without a shred of probable cause. We are pulling every text message, every email, and every body camera video this department has generated in the last 5 years. We're going to see what other procedural errors you've been burying." What the forensic sweep uncovered was far worse than Adrian had initially expected. Officer Derek Sloan was not a lone bad apple. He administered a private WhatsApp group called The Night Shift that included 6 other Crestwood Falls patrol officers. When technicians cracked Sloan's phone, they found a digital paper trail of pure poison. The officers had created a gamified point system. They awarded points for stopping and detaining minorities who drove through the town's wealthy borders. They shared racist memes, joked about excessive force, and mocked the citizens they were sworn to protect. On the morning of the incident, minutes before Sloan hit the sirens, he had typed a message to the group. Got a live one on Main. Fancy suit. Expensive Audi. Doesn't belong here. Going to rattle his cage and see what falls out. $10 says he cries. When Jonathan Pike received the discovery material, he almost smiled. It was the smoking gun that turned a standard civil rights case into a multi-million-dollar municipal nightmare. The psychological collapse of the department was immediate. Officer Travis Quinn, terrified of federal prison time for conspiracy to violate civil rights, flipped. In a recorded proffer, he admitted everything. Sloan regularly targeted Black and Hispanic drivers without cause. Captain Yates knew about the aggressive tactics and looked the other way because it made the town's wealthy residents feel secure. And on the day of Adrian's arrest, Sloan had explicitly told Quinn to fabricate the report to match the regional auto theft profile. Within 48 hours, the story went national. News vans surrounded the municipal building. The town council was besieged by citizens horrified to learn their tax dollars had been funding a precinct that operated like a heavily armed fraternity of bigots. Adrian returned to his work with the same calm demeanor he had shown while handcuffed against his own car. He attended his task force meetings. He continued dismantling actual criminal networks. He let the lawyers and the Department of Justice handle the demolition of Officer Sloan. True power, he knew, did not require shouting. It required the meticulous, inescapable application of the law. 6 months after the cold steel first closed around Adrian Holt's wrists, the final confrontation took place. Not in a noisy courtroom, but in a sterile, wood-paneled conference room of a high-end arbitration firm in downtown Hartford. The long glass tables served as the battlefield. On one side sat Adrian, impeccable in a navy pinstripe suit, radiating absolute, unyielding confidence. Beside him sat Jonathan Pike. Across the table sat Mayor Patricia Ellison, who looked as if she had aged a decade in 6 months, and the city's defense counsel, Gerald Moss, who looked like a man frantically bailing water from a sinking ship. Former Officer Derek Sloan was not present. He had been terminated 3 months earlier and was confined to home under federal indictment awaiting a criminal trial that would almost certainly end his freedom. "Let's skip the customary pleasantries," Pike said, leaning forward and steepling his fingers. He pushed a thick binder across the glass. It slid with a soft, menacing sound. "Inside is the complete record of your municipal nightmare. Encrypted group chat messages. Former Officer Quinn's sworn deposition detailing the systematic targeting of minorities. Unedited dispatch audio. High-definition body camera footage of Officer Sloan physically assaulting a senior federal executive. If I take this mountain of evidence to a federal jury, the punitive damages alone will gut your city's operating budget for the next decade." Moss swallowed and adjusted his tie as if it had suddenly tightened. "Mr. Pike, Agent Holt, the city recognizes that severe missteps occurred. We are prepared to issue a comprehensive public apology in 3 major newspapers. We will completely overhaul use of force protocols and bias training. Financially, our insurance and reserves can support a settlement of $1 million. Pike laughed, a sharp, biting sound that bounced off the acoustic glass. "$1 million, Gerald? You must have me confused with a personal injury lawyer chasing ambulances. My client is a supervisory special agent whose constitutional rights were willfully and maliciously trampled by a taxpayer-funded thug operating under a documented culture of institutional racism. The public humiliation, the psychological distress, the sheer malicious intent. $1 million is not an offer. It is an insult. We are demanding $8 million, and we want Captain Yates's formal resignation on my desk by tomorrow morning." Mayor Ellison choked on her water. $8 million is impossible. We would have to slash emergency services, defund the fire department, and lay off teachers. You would be punishing the innocent citizens of Crestwood Falls for the rogue actions of one patrolman. She looked at Adrian, searching for any trace of sympathy. She found none. Adrian unbuttoned his jacket and leaned forward, resting his forearms on the glass. When he spoke, his deep voice cut through the mayor's panic like a scalpel. "I did not create this crisis, Mayor. Your city cultivated a culture of aggressive exclusion. You hired and retained officers who believed their personal prejudices were municipal policy. You turned a blind eye because it kept your wealthy constituents feeling artificially safe. The cost of that willful ignorance is steep." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You handed Derek Sloan a badge, a loaded firearm, and the unchecked power to deprive innocent people of their liberty. You will now pay the invoice for his actions. The number is not negotiable, only the timeline is. The negotiation that followed was brutal, exhausting, and entirely one-sided. Over the next 6 hours, every weak precedent Moss raised was dismantled. As the autumn sun finally dropped below the Hartford skyline, the city capitulated. Crestwood Falls would pay Adrian Holt exactly $5.6 million. The agreement was ironclad and immediately enforceable. Captain Raymond Yates was forced to submit an immediate, unpensioned resignation for gross failure to supervise. The city was required to accept an independent federal monitor who would oversee hiring, training, and daily operations of the police department for the next 10 years. When the final papers were signed, Mayor Ellison looked utterly defeated. Her hand trembled as she wrote her name. Adrian signed with calm, fluid precision, the signature of a man who had simply applied the law until the system had no choice but to obey it. The aftermath sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities nationwide. The case became mandatory study material in police academies across the country, a clinical illustration of the catastrophic consequences of racial profiling. Adrian Holt did not keep the money. True to the character that had carried him through 22 years of federal service, he used the entire $5.6 million to establish the Equal Justice Initiative Foundation. The foundation provided full-ride law school scholarships for underprivileged minority students who committed to careers in civil rights litigation and public defense. He transformed the worst morning of his professional life into a lasting engine for generational change. As for the former officers of Crestwood Falls, their fates were sealed in disgrace. Travis Quinn was fired, lost his pension, and ended up working night security at a rundown strip mall. Derek Sloan pleaded guilty to federal civil rights violations to avoid a longer sentence. The young man who had once boasted about putting people in cages spent 48 months in a federal penitentiary. He left as a convicted felon, permanently barred from public office or carrying a firearm. Adrian continued his career with the Bureau and was eventually promoted to Deputy Assistant Director. He remained a resident of Crestwood Falls, living quietly in the house on Crestview Drive. Every morning on the way to work, he stopped at the Copper Bean. Noah always had the large vanilla latte with the extra shot waiting. And whenever the new, thoroughly retrained Crestwood Falls patrol officers saw the black Audi rolling down Main Street, they did not see a suspect. They did not see a target. They saw a $5.6 million reminder of the Constitution of the United States. They tipped their hats as he drove past.